Hello and welcome to Fine is a Four-Letter Word. My guest today, Helen Fanucci. Welcome to the show, Helen.
Thank you so much for having me, Lori. I can't wait.
This is going to be a good conversation. I can already feel the energy.
Yes,
So,
indeed. Let's
yeah,
do it.
let's dive right in. I always like starting out with asking the question kind of like where did you come from? What is what was your background growing up in terms of the values and beliefs that you were raised with?
Well, I was raised with that I can do anything if I put my mind to it. So that was great. And then also, family and community matters. And so I've translated that into my work in terms of really paying attention to who I work with and how I take care of my team.
Okay. Has that always been like, have you always been able to control that? Like sometimes you get, I know that's like a weird, like you can't control it, but you end up in situations.
Yeah, so I've been in corporate America. I left corporate America at the end of December, but I've been in corporate America a long time, my whole career, and you can't control it. You really can't. You end up, there's reorgs, and then you have new managers, and you make the best of it. One of my mantras is, this won't last forever. And, I know it applies when I have great managers in a great situation and also when I don't have a great situation. And I've been really fortunate to be able to navigate into different roles and jobs through my career to kind of optimize the things that matter to me.
Okay. And so what else, like how were those values instilled in you? What did you see when you were growing up? Like,
Yeah.
often values are not like, hey, Helen, education is a value in our family. Like that's not how it goes. It's not presented that way.
Yeah. Well, I guess the kind of the thing that really I think about when you ask me the question is when I was applying to colleges. So I lived outside of Boston till I was 12 and then moved to Seattle. And so I asked my dad, I said, I would really like to go to MIT. Do you think I can get in? And he said, well, you never know until you try. And so he was always being open to, okay, you know, be in action, try things, seek out opportunities, and then figure out what happens if it works or doesn't work. And so that is one of the reasons I said, I can do whatever I want, is because he was so open minded. Also, he was the minister of a congregational church. And when I was, I don't know, in ninth grade, something like that, 10th grade, I decided I wanted to try out a different church. And so he was very open-minded about that. And I have a sibling who's Mormon. I have, siblings with different kinds of perspectives on religion. And so that's another example.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. Yeah, that coming from that background. That's I love that. He was that way to help you decide what works for you, as
Yeah, and
opposed
then
to
I
this is what I've been doing and this is what you should do too.
Right. And then I would come back after hearing the minister and I would ask him questions. I go, well, this is what they said. What do you think? And then he would give me kind of a theological perspective. And he was an open minded guy. And so it was really probably formative, I would say.
Yeah, I bet. Um when you that's a move across the country, like Boston to Seattle was like culture shock, huh?
It was really hard for me because I moved at the end of sixth grade. I was popular. I had lots of friends. And then in seventh grade, it's the first year in junior high school at the time because it was seventh, eighth, and ninth. And then I was like nobody. And it was really hard socially to connect. And there were cliques that were pre-established and all that stuff. So that was a pretty tough time for me. And then also in parallel, my mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer and she died at the end of seventh grade. So in May of when I was 13.
Uh-huh.
And so that was also tough.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. And that was after you had moved?
Yes, the year, like she literally was diagnosed 2 months after we had
Oh,
moved. And then, um, yeah, so lots of tough things in
Yeah.
all of that.
And so that I'm sure taught you about adaptability.
Yeah, and resilience. And one of the things that they did is my mom and dad gave me for my birthday in February that year a trip back to the Boston area to see old friends. So I did that. Actually, the timing ended up, I did it after she passed away. So it was really great to reconnect. And then I just realized I needed to find my own way with a new friend group and
Yeah.
various things in Seattle. But yeah, adaptability for sure,
Okay.
resilience.
Yeah. Yeah. Um yeah, so tell me more. You went to MIT, you got in, like spoiler alert.
Yes, I got in.
Got
Yes, I
in.
went to MIT.
Yeah, which is it's interesting. My nephew is 14 and a couple years ago he told his parents that that's where he wants to go.
Mm,
And my sister-in-law was like, "We had nothing to do with it. He just decided that that's what he wants to do." And so,
yeah, it's
we'll
pretty
see.
awesome.
Yeah. We'll see if he
Yeah, it's
has
for
the grades and the drive to
right.
get in. Um yeah, and so then how you studied engineering and how did your career go? Cuz
Yeah, so like you say, fine is a four-letter word. I mean,
yes.
there's lots of moments of being fine and then trying to figure out how to actually be fine. And so my teenage years were that, and I think it's hard for everybody. And
Yeah.
then at MIT, I really loved it. I originally didn't get into the living group that I hoped to get into, but then a spot opened up within a month of arriving to MIT, and so then I was able to move into a living group, make new friends. And yes, I did become, and I have a mechanical engineering degree. And during, I guess the reason I like that is because it made sense to me. It's like applied physics, and my brain works that way. And so it's like, oh, I can touch it, feel it, it makes sense. And then my senior year, I applied for jobs. I had like 7 job opportunities. And I decided that I wanted to go someplace new and different. So I didn't want to go back to Seattle. I didn't want to stay in Boston. And so I decided to take a job with IBM in high tech as a engineer, a manufacturing engineer in Silicon Valley, because I thought high tech probably had a future as opposed to some of the other industries where I was given job offers. They just, not that they didn't have a future, but I thought high tech would be more exciting, and it's
Mhm.
proven to be that.
Yeah. Yeah. So you seem to have an adventurous spirit because you are not afraid to go, "Oh, I'm here. Now I want to go there. Now I want to explore this other thing."
Yeah, and so I had a couple like decisions. So one is I didn't want to have any serious relationship, romantic ties to anybody my senior year because I really wanted to have it be my choice, my way. Didn't want to have other considerations, and it was important to me to kind of go out on my own, if you will, and make my way. And I remember, in the first few months after being in San Jose, California, and starting to work for IBM, I thought, oh my goodness, is this all there is?
Mm.
Because so much of my life had been about getting into college, graduating from college, and now it was like I was looking at, okay, people do this for like 40 years or whatever. Like, really, is this all there is? So there's a bit of a panic, or maybe panic's too strong of a word, but oh shit moment, like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? And not I did that job for a while, and probably within a couple years of starting that job at IBM, I told my boss I wanted to move into marketing and sales because I wanted to be out with customers to help them use technology. Because given all the activity in Silicon Valley, I thought that would be way more fun and exciting and invigorating. And he was in the manufacturing plant. He had no idea how to help me.
Mm.
He, I think, was probably disappointed because he wanted me to stay working on his team. And so I ended up through my network outside of IBM meeting a guy who was a manager in a marketing team at IBM and navigating my way into that kind of a role. And so I was successful in doing that and then going through IBM sales training and then getting a sales territory in Silicon Valley. And so, it kind of worked out, but it was a lot of I had to do it on my own because I
Yeah.
didn't really have the help. And as we all know now, networking is everything.
Well, I was just going to come back to that point because it's unusual, at least in the conversations, a lot of the conversations I've had with people who have spent a lot of their career inside corporate, that they don't have a network. They haven't built one because they haven't seen the need to. And then something happens, whether that is of their own choice or not, and they realize they don't have one.
Yeah.
What was the thing that, like, that inspired you to build one? Because you said you were talking to people in your network, so that means you had started building one.
Yeah. So my senior year of college, a friend of mine who is, gosh, I'm not even sure how I met her. Hmm. Anyway, there was personal development seminars and workshops going on, and I think I met her in one of those. And so when I moved to California, I ended up taking some personal development workshops in California. And so that was the cornerstone of building my network because I was interested in that and learning more about myself.
Hmm.
And she stayed in on the East Coast, and actually we've kind of lost touch with each other. But the network part, it wasn't intentional about building a network. It was more about personal development and being exposed to new ideas. And in the course of that, I met new people, and that was ultimately where I met the gentleman who worked for IBM in a marketing function who helped me navigate to a job that was actually really perfect for me because IBM was launching a CAD CAM product, which is a computer aided design workstation that was going to be sold to manufacturing engineers and design engineers. And so here I was an engineer, and I could represent the product and talk to the other engineers. So that worked out really, really well. It was serendipitous.
Yes. And have there been other moments? I imagine there have, because in most people's careers, there are these serendipitous moments that you don't necessarily recognize when you're in them, but only when you're looking back.
Well, another serendipitous moment was when I had a sales territory for IBM, and one of my customers, I was signing in on the, visitor sign-in sheet, and I realized that there was somebody else from IBM who had signed in earlier that day. And so in at IBM, they teach you, well, you're responsible for your account. You're the face of IBM to that customer. So I was like, WTF, what is this guy doing in my account? And I don't know him. And so I went back to the office and I looked him up and I reached out to him and I basically said, WTF, what are you doing? And it turned out, so that's how I learned that IBM and my customer, the company was called Metaphor Computer Systems, were in conversations to do a deal. And, kind of a strategic initiative where Metaphor would port their system over to IBM's OS2, the operating system, and for their PCs. And so anyway, I fast forward, I ended up leaving IBM because I couldn't see IBM touted lifetime employment at that point, and I couldn't
Hmm.
see myself staying there forever. I didn't like the prescribed career path for sales, which included moving to New York, like Armonk, New York area, and things like that. And so, and also, again, so much was going on in Silicon Valley. So I wanted to go to a startup. So I did. And then I was like, oh my God, what have I done?
This is a whole different. I mean, I can't even imagine going from IBM, where they've been in business forever and they have all these policies and procedures, right? And now you're going to a startup where it's probably like barely managed chaos.
Right. And to make it worse, it was a mom and pop
Oh, geez.
company owned by these two individuals, and there's like 20 employees. And one is I realized how naive and impulsive I was. And I wasn't actually impulsive, that's the wrong word, but I didn't appreciate the choice I had made in the full context of that, and how kind of I didn't have any good criteria for selecting, my next career step.
Mm,
I and there wasn't really anybody for me to talk to because I didn't know anybody who was in that situation. So I ended up going there, and it was really hard for me to be successful because the one of the owners would like look over my shoulder and ask me what I was doing, and he had a hard time letting go of things. But here's the fortuitous part: is that when I realized I needed to move on from that role about 3 or 4 months in, I reached out to the executive at my customer who is doing these negotiations with IBM, and I said, if there's a role, if you are successful in this negotiation, there's a role that opens up, I would love to be considered for it. Which ended up being perfect and wonderful because he would not have hired me right out of IBM, and I'd already left, so I was, it was open for him to hire me. And that was probably one of the best times in my career, was working for Metaphor for the 4 years that I did that. It was amazing. It was a smallish company. I mean, everyone's small relative to IBM. It was like 350
right.
people, and it was fantastic.
So again, it comes back to the networking and staying in touch with the people in your network and reaching out to
Right.
them and maintaining those connections.
Right. Well, and I hadn't really, so I didn't really have a relationship because he was chairman of the board, and I didn't really have a relationship with him, but we had met. And so I just reached out to him, and he was very open to it. And, it moved forward. But yes, networking, networking, networking,
Well,
and
that's
being,
a, go ahead.
I just say, and being unafraid to pivot when you know you need to make a change, because I could tell I was suffering and it wasn't going to get better.
Yeah.
So I had to figure it out.
Yeah, and recognizing that, okay, so chairman of the board, like a lot of people would be intimidated by that, and recognizing that people are people. Like it doesn't
Hmm.
matter what their title is. And if you think you can be of service, just picking up the phone or, sending an email, picking up the phone now is like such a novel concept, but it works.
So I sent him a physical letter in the
Oh,
mail.
I like that even better.
So, well, it also, think about it, it was in the mid 80s.
Hmm.
So it was much more common. So I
Yes.
sent him a physical letter. I remember that. And the other thing, well, here's another story that actually kind of gets to your point is, and I'm kind of proud of this actually. So after Metaphor finished porting the product um, to IBM's OS, and this was right at the cusp when Microsoft and IBM were breaking up, and IBM had decided to go in a different direction. Anyway, the product launched in New York at a big launch event that IBM had. So I was on a flight going back to San Francisco on American Airlines nonstop. And I had upgraded myself to first class. And in first class was the president of IBM, and Jack Keeler. And so he had an open seat next to him. So I sat in it.
I love it.
And I thought, what's the worst that can happen is I get kicked out, right? And so I sat next to him, and then we talked. And when I came back to the company to Metaphor, I told David, the chairman, I said, so, Jack says he really likes to visit engineering teams. Why don't you invite him to come out and visit? He knew about the product launch, obviously, and all that stuff. And so I wrote, Ghost wrote a letter for him to send and whatnot. And so that's kind of like the gumption to go do that, right? And
Yeah.
then fast forward a couple years later. So then after the launch, I moved to London and was selling Metaphor's products and services in London. And then when I came back, I went on maternity leave. I got married and I went on maternity leave, and Metaphor was purchased by IBM. So I like to think I had something to do with fostering that
Oh,
connection at an executive level. So
yes. Yes. I love that you took that it's somewhat of a risk. Like it's a little scary, I would think, for most people to just make that move. I'm
it
just
makes
going
your
to sit
heart
down and
go.
start talking to this guy. And again, just a person.
Right. And so I was like, why are you flying commercial and not taking the
Yeah.
IBM corporate jet? And
Good question.
he said, well, I have some family I'm visiting, and I don't want to um, mix that with being in the corporate jet. And so he felt like from a integrity point of view and responsibility point of view, taking the corporate jet wasn't the thing to do, even though he was also having some business meetings. So
Wow.
anyway, that was just kind of interesting.
Yeah, definitely. What a novel idea. Integrity. Integrity from corporate executives. No, kidding. So, well, we keep hearing all these stories about how that's the opposite of that. So
Well,
that's
the IBM culture was really different back then. That
yes, I
was
know.
when IBM was on its decline,
Yeah.
and then it ended up, bringing in the guy from the RJR Reynolds Tobacco Company, Lou Gerstner, and
Oh
the
yeah.
culture really changed and whatnot. So this was pre-Lou Gerstner culture, which was lifetime employment, and integrity was a huge value at IBM.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned that you had gotten married, you were now having building a family, and
Yep.
everything was fine for a while.
Yeah, for a while. Yeah. So anyway, so I ended up after maternity leave, and the the company got sold, and I didn't really have a job to go back to because I had been selling in London, and we decided to move back to California. So I ended up taking time off, and it ended up being about a year. And about 9 months into my time off, I was itching to get back to work, and so I ended up working for Apple at the time and did that. And then having a second child and various things that happen in career and marriage and whatnot. And then ended up ultimately getting divorced when my kids were 3 and 6. And then being in the spot where I had sole custody and sole financial accountability for my kids, and having to figure that out and just keep my head above water. At that point in time, I was working for Sun Microsystems, and I remember thinking, "Oh my goodness, I have like so few degrees of freedom. Like if the kids get sick or what have you, I've got to like, how am I going to deal with that?" And I ended up going from sales into marketing at that point when my kids were younger, because in marketing a lot of the meetings are internally focused,
Mhm.
and when you're selling and you have a big customer presentation, it's like, how do you miss that? You can't really miss it. And then I thought, well, that's way too much stress, particularly trying to navigate taking care of the kids and making sure they're okay in the mix.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, did you ever feel like you couldn't do it? Because you seem like the kind of person who has this spirit that's like, all right, whatever I'm focused on, that's what's going to happen. And then when you're thrown into a situation where you're now sole custody, sole provider, I'm sure that there were moments, but overall, did you feel like, all right, I got this? Or was it?
Oh, so I guess the thing is that I go, this is untenable to stay married. And I mean, I thought about it a lot because it's not one of those things you take casually.
Right.
And I, when I decided, and then I just like, took it one step at a time. And then you find yourself in this spot. I go, so then it's like, okay, well, how do I dial down the stress with career?
Hmm.
Um, I had ended up hiring a high school neighbor gal to pick up my kids from daycare because I had like at that time even like 45 minute to an hour commute each way to the office. And it was going to the office. So did I feel like I couldn't do it? No, I guess not. But at the same time, I was uncertain how it would all turn out or what might come my way. And I would I have to sell my house, would I have to move to another area. I thought that stability was the best thing as much as I could provide it. um, and along the way, as we look back on parenting, there's things that I wish I had done differently, like everybody, I'm sure.
Uh-huh.
But
Uh-huh.
it got easier as the kids got older and more independent. um, but it's just never easy. It is just not easy. And
Right.
even dual working couples, I mean, it's not easy. Raising kids is hard, and I don't think that that's talked about enough.
Yeah. How much did your faith, and I don't mean necessarily religious faith, but you mentioned that you had that background. How much did that play? How much of a part did that play in all of the steps that you took, from the beginning all the way through to now in having a faith that everything will work out?
um, I would say not so much a religious faith. I had a lot of conversations with my father on my commute home and various things. And when I finally told my husband I wanted to get divorced, my dad was visiting and things like that. He didn't have any say in all of the decision making, but he was supportive. I've learned over time that I can figure it out and I'll be okay.
Mhm.
And I look back at those moments where I felt, um, like, oh my gosh, what have I done or what's going on? And then I get through it, and that builds strength of character. And it also builds, I think, an internal knowledge that, whatever life throws at me, I can figure this out and get to the next thing or move through it. So I think about that actually quite a bit because um, like having to do, I'm working on a keynote presentation. I think, oh gosh, what am I going to say? And it's like this, it kind of feels like homework at MIT. And I face homework and I go, oh, how am I going to do this? I don't know how to do it. And then I just figure it out and I move through it. So all that stuff I think builds on each other that gives a resilience and a faith of personal perseverance and character.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there tools or techniques that you employ now to help build that?
Um, well, sometimes I meditate because, that will sometimes help me calm and relax and just get into a different zone that helps me feel like, okay, everything's going to be fine.
Mhm.
Exercising, I exercise pretty regularly because that definitely takes care of me. And when I don't feel as good. So I do things like that, um, try to take care of my body and feed me, so to speak,
Yeah.
emotionally, and not eating junk and stuff like that. But in terms of tools, I would say meditation and exercise are probably the things that. And talking to my husband, I'm now remarried. I got remarried 2 years ago after being divorced for 24 years, and
Mhm.
I never thought I'd remarry, but then my husband came into my life, and it was just obvious that he was the right guy for me. So we talked a lot, and that's been super helpful, just life changing for me.
Yeah, awesome. What is on the uh the the horizon for you now? What do
Well,
you
I
see?
started my own business in January and to help B2B companies with their go to market using AI tools. And although AI is ubiquitous or it's the buzz, some of it doesn't require AI. Some of it's just good old fashioned sales management and coaching stuff. And in 2022, I launched a book called Love Your Team, a survival guide for sales managers in a hybrid world. So, my audience and my focus is how do I help managers be more successful with their teams in selling? Because I think managers are undervalued, under trained in terms of, there's lots of sales training, but from a leadership and management point of view, I think that that's under focused on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my focus. And when you start a company, and this is, I think you have this idea of where to focus, and then it doesn't necessarily work out that way. And it's right now, it's a hard time in tech. So people don't want, how you're going to help them and how you're going to connect that to their revenue and their bottom line. So then you end up kind of, I won't say the business finds you, but figuring out what's resonating with different audiences and then doing more of that. So it's been
Mm-hmm.
a bit of a navigation to figure it out. And so working on my business is kind of what's next for me, and continuing to work on my business and grow my business. And then also, I took up pickleball in January, so I've been playing
I'm like
playing
I'm like the
pickleball.
only person left in the country that is not
I think
playing.
so. I think so. So I have a great time doing that, and I've met new people doing that. So that's been fun. And I'm not that great, but I fit that in. And I don't know. My husband and I just, I'm also a associate producer of a movie called Show Her the Money, which is
What?
highlighting the disparity of funding, venture capital funding for women. Women only get 2% of the VC funding. And
Yes.
so I helped a group in Portland, Oregon, put on a screening of the movie. So we went back to Maine last week and had a phenomenal time. It was a great showing. And so I've also been doing that and supporting some of the screenings. And so there's 3 screenings coming up in October. I'll be attending one in the Seattle area, which is where I am now, and then Tucson, because we also have a house in Tucson. So we'll be there later in October. And then the final, if you will, screening of the 100 City Road Tour will be in Los Angeles on October 20th. So I'll be there too.
Okay. Fantastic. So that was kind of like a side note. Like, oh, and by the way, I'm also an associate producer. Like, wow,
Yeah.
that's so cool.
So here's what I decided, and again, I don't think I had this. I could not have told you this in January, but here we are in September. So here are my principles for deciding what I do. Is I to only do things that interest me, and
Hmm.
interest is not very obviously specific with a lot of criteria, but it piques my interest, and I leave time so I have the capacity to explore new things that come my way. So I'm not going to work probably more than 20 to 25 hours a week. So make sure I have capacity. And thirdly, no jerks. Like, I don't want to work with jerks anymore. No jerky customers, no jerky people. So those are my principles. I think it works pretty well.
I love that, and I'm glad that came up before we stopped recording because that is those are some key takeaways right there. I love it. Thank you.
You bet.
And yeah, and before we close, I have to ask you the song. What's the song? Because you have already, I can tell, a lot of energy. So when you need that extra boost of energy, what's the song you listen to?
I love Brown Eyed Girl by Van Morrison.
Oh yeah,
I love Van Morrison. I have brown eyes, so I thought, oh yeah, that's my song.
I
And
like it.
it boosts my energy.
Cool. Well, we will put a link to that in the show notes. And if someone wants to continue a conversation with you, how would they reach you? What's the best way?
LinkedIn is the best way. I'm on LinkedIn.
That's how we connected. So, yes, find Helen
Yes.
on LinkedIn. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Helen, thank you so much for joining me today on Fine is a Four-Letter Word.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's been really fun. Thank you, Lori.